Hello and good evening. So glad to have you all here with me this evening, and it's so wonderful to have you join with us to be available here to learn about grief, to experience a little bit of what you and others are experiencing right now as you mourn and grieve the loss of someone really important to you, someone you love. My name is Galen Goben, Dr. Galen Goben, and I'm going to be with you here this evening to tell you a little bit about grief and rituals and how they kind of intermingle together. It's really important that we learn about rituals, that we know about them, that we understand how much they are a part of what we can use to heal, of what we can use to grow through this grief, to move through this grief, to travel the journey that we are on in this grief. So again, I thank you very much for being with me this evening. If you got a question or something, put it in the chat box there, and we'll try to get to that here this evening as we walk our way through this. So I want to start by talking about an experience that I had this last week. I went to two different funerals this past week. They were a week apart, and now with the relaxing of the restrictions here in California for the COVID, the separations and everything, people are starting to come back and have a lot of services. The first one I went to was for a friend of mine who died 15 months ago. In fact, he was one of the first people, unfortunately, to die from COVID. The other one was a colleague who I worked with for many, many years and died 2.5 months ago. Some of you and some others might be saying, well, why go? We're past our mourning period. We normally at work and kind of in our own brains and things believe and hold and just think that we ought to be through this in about 3 days. That's kind of the amount of time that we get off from work. And there just is something kind of societal that tells us, hey, we shouldn't have to mess with this, and we should be done, and we should be beyond this. That's just kind of an internal thought. We really should move on from this. But there's a lot of things that we can learn about with grief and understand that let us know that these kinds of things are really, really important and that it's really helpful to do. Some people, I'm one of those folks that read the obits many days of the week, and I will look in there and see about people and learn about their lives and all. And at the bottom, it'll say, hey, no service by the instructions of the decedent. I'm not sure why they want to do that. People may not want to complicate others' lives. It takes time to stop what you're doing and to move and to go on through, to go and attend to a service. And after someone has died, they may want to say, I don't want to bother anybody that way. They may not feel worthy of the service. Believe it or not, as we do plan those things and stuff, there can be a lot of struggle with that. Why I'm nobody special, and why do that? And some others, they say that they want to save time and and money and just have people get on, get back with your life, get on, get moving and go forward. It just isn't that easy. Grief isn't that easy. First off, it's a journey. That's why we call this website Journeys Through Grief. It's a journey, it's a movement, it's a traveling forward. And we don't just stop and change and do something completely different because our whole world has changed. So, this year we may have had other reasons that folks would have decided not to have services and things. We couldn't get together. I heard more than one person saying, my mom, my grandmother, my child, whoever it was who died, they don't deserve this. And they're right about that. Nobody deserves to have a small service with maybe, only 10 or 15 people, or outside, and only a graveside, or something. There's a lot of different ways that we were trying to do things this past year, but nobody really does deserve that. We all deserve something important where people do stop and come together. They also may not want to revisit some of those difficult and powerful emotions. We are a ways beyond our grief, and some of that stuff has kind of settled in and settled down, and some of it, we do sort of begin to feel kind of normal with it, and it starts to feel like something we're used to. But and we may not want to go to a service or think about one to revisit and to have those emotions brought back up. But the reality is that services are really important. Memorial services, funeral services, and the rituals that we do that transform our lives and move us through a different time period. They are very, very important to our grief and help us to make our way through. I heard somebody say at one of these services that we all have unfinished symphonies in our lives. And I love the way that this woman put that. That's true, and it's truer this year than it has probably ever been, with so much put on hold and so much we had to wait for and with. But what a funeral, what a memorial service, what these rituals do for us when we gather together with other people who knew and loved this person and know and love us, when we do things in time and space and come together to commemorate and to celebrate. What we do is we give ourselves an opportunity to hear about a person's life. We get an opportunity to review a little bit, to pause. Something that's really important in our grief is to learn to pause, and we're always moving so much. It can be hard to do that. But a service, these rituals give us a chance to pause, to be present, to rest a little bit, and to acknowledge through different things that we do that one time in our life has come to an end and a new time has begun. And that may sound like a lot, but those are some of the things that rituals do for us, some of the things that they help us to accommodate and to recognize and to put in place as we travel this grieving road that we are on. So, why do we want to do these? Why do we do rituals? What need do they fill? Well, when a person dies, the whole world changes. I've talked with enough folks to know and traveled my own journey to understand how unmoored we can feel as we are grieving. When this person dies, they take a little bit of us with them, and the whole world feels completely different. We can be unmoored, as somebody says. We can be cast adrift, if you like those, as a metaphor, kind of that understanding of grief as being, a tossed about ocean kind of thing. We can feel lost in the wilderness when a person dies. We can feel like we are dropped into a landscape that is completely different from anything that we've ever been around before, and yet still has some stuff that kind of feels normal, kind of feels familiar. Familiar is probably a better word than normal. So whatever metaphor really helps you, whatever kind of idea and image gives you a chance to enter into this grief experience, pick that one, but understand that we just are kind of lost. It's a wilderness when this person dies, because our world, our self, our life has changed. So rituals, what they do when we get them started, when we get working on them and things, provide an anchor for us. They create a map if we're lost. They give for us at least a compass, if you will, to put down and to kind of point some direction to go. Because so much of what we can feel like is like is, again, that feeling, that sense of lost, and just not quite sure what to do, what needs to be next. So these rituals, they're rhythmic, first off. Rituals provide some sense of a day, some sense of a moment, some sense of moving through time. We have these personal rituals, and we may not think about them, but we certainly have them. Think about when you get up in the morning. You pretty much do the same thing every day, at least if you're going to work or you have obligations during the day. You get up and the same things seem to happen. It may include a newspaper, it may include Facebook. As you look in on that, it may include a phone call to someone that you know and love. It may include coffee or newspapers or whatever it may be. But these things we do in kind of the same order, and they help us to know what we need to do for that day to move forward. So they give us a rhythm within our life. And when a person dies, the rhythm of our life has been totally disrupted. So something else then that rituals do, and that funerals help with in particular, or it's easy to see with a funeral, is they help us to transition from one time of life to another. They help us to transition to a place where this, we have been in a place where this person was alive. We knew ourselves. We knew what the world kind of was going to do for us and how to live in it. And then they die, and that is a before and after time that certainly changes the world. And we stand in that kind of empty space, that strange space. It's a doorway almost into a new kind of life and a new time in our life. And rituals help us to navigate that. So think about your life again. I would invite you to do that. Some of us go through religious rituals such as baptism or first communion or bar and bat mitzvahs. They all come at a particular time when someone is moving from a time in their life to another, putting on adulthood or coming out into the world. Quinceañeras are things like that as well. Think about graduations. We had to put those off for this whole last year and a half for the most part, and only now starting to have them this year, or having them recently. But graduations say, you have completed this, and you have worked hard, and you have done things, and this is an accomplishment, and you move on from that. And they have whole sets of things where names are read, and music is played, and we pomp and circumstance, and we move through them. And then, of course, there are weddings. Weddings are certainly rituals that move us from single life to married life. Retirements that move us from work life into now a different time. All of these rituals help us to understand this movement that we are making from one time in our life to another. And funerals and memorials and the memorials around when someone has died, those rituals that we have there really fill that same slot. We have been in a time when that person was around and alive and with us, and now they are gone. And so what is this new time going to be? And a ritual helps us to move through that. Something else that rituals do, it's really important, is help us to tie ourselves into something that is larger than we are. Again, a real experience in our grief, especially early on after somebody dies, is feeling very, very vulnerable. We feel vulnerable because one of the things that a loved one dying does with us is to remind us that we are going to die. Now, we all know that. We get it. It's a rational kind of thing to know that everything dies. But functioning on a different level, kind of that spirit level, that internal level, that heart level that doesn't really get and function quite the same way, that's a weird feeling, and that feels really uncomfortable, and we're not quite sure what to do with that. And that's just a human experience. And so these rituals, what they do is they help us to tie together our life, the life that the person whom we loved and now are commemorating has lived, into something bigger. And what that does is it begins to push back on this idea of death a little bit. It pushes back and helps us to manage the really uncomfortable feelings that the death of someone brings to us. A friend of mine said one time after the last of her parents died, she said, it felt like a conveyor belt moving me up, and right in front of me then was the grave. She's a young woman, she was in her 40s at the time, but she said now there was no generation between me and the grave. And so that's a real common kind of experience, to struggle with our own mortality, to have it come up. What does life mean now? And these are things, and a ritual tying our life into some grander story, be it Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism or some of the other dharmic faiths that we have, be it our understanding of suffering. What's the point of suffering and all? Be it our understanding of how the whole universe functions and what's my role, what's my place, what's my life here in this grand scheme of things. So it ties us into something much bigger than us and helps us to feel a part of a whole instead of so vulnerable and separated. Rituals also are created in time. They are things that we do, and we do them in a specific space. So let's break that out a little bit and understand what those different things mean. Rituals are made up of actions that we do. I talked about walking across the stage at a graduation. Being feted and going up at the retirement. Be it an employees meeting or a special dinner or some kind of other experience like that, and being brought up in front and said thank you for this. Those are things that happen in these kinds of experiences. They have actions that we do. So they require our bodies. Our bodies have to do things. And the ritual then brings our body into the experience with us. It's not something that is only just ahead. And so having our bodies do that and thinking about them, it helps to bring us all together as a universal whole. Again, we can feel compartmentalized, we can feel separated, we can feel, again, very vulnerable and lonely after someone has died. And being a part of a ritual like a funeral or a memorial can really help to bring us around because of the actions that we do and our bodies and our cells being brought back together again. Now, rituals are also things that when we do them, there is a specific time set aside. Again, you think about a funeral or a memorial service, and we have a time planned for that so that people can come together. And they have to know where to come so that the community all comes together. And this is an acknowledgement that the whole community, it's not just a small group, but that there are wider elements of this, of this community and of this place that we live that have been impacted by this person's death. And it helps us to see the impact and the connections that we have with other people and the connections that the decedent had with other people. And we come together in one specific space and one specific time to do this. All of these things together, what they help us to feel, what they help us to do, is in part break that sense of powerlessness that a death close to us can make us feel. Powerlessness, a sense of helplessness, not knowing what to do, not knowing, sometimes who to call or what different needs that we may have, are really things that make us feel uncomfortable. And so when we put these together and we come together, what begins to happen then is a sense of regaining our own sense of power and our own sense of what we call self-efficacy. We are able to do things. We are able to manage our world. We are able to function in this world again, and it helps us to feel okay again. It helps us to connect with having the strength and the courage to do something that will be healing and helpful. And we are doing that for ourselves. And that is a very powerful experience that we have. It's exhausting because, boy, there's a lot of details when you plan a memorial service or a funeral or any of the other rituals that we've been talking about. There's a lot of energy put out with that. But it's really important and helps us to fight back against that sense of helplessness and powerlessness that can be so debilitating for us. So now the last thing I would talk about is, so why now? Why now? This person died 15 months ago or several months ago and everything. Why do we have services now? Well, Thomas Lynch, who's a poet and an author and also a funeral director, says that funerals help to get the dead where they need to go and the living where they need to be. I want to think about that for a minute, and let's kind of cut that and separate that out a little bit. Funerals, memorial services help to get the dead where they need to go. We need to place the dead in some place, be it a cemetery within a grave or a niche or ground space or some other place that they need to be. We need to get them to a place. If it's to go to the sea and to scatter them at sea, if we're going to lovingly place them, take them, home with ourselves to have them with us at home, those are all different things that help this person get to where they need to be in a final place. The dead, you see, when somebody dies, if we don't have anything, they just sort of like disappear. And at least that's the way the brain and the heart kind of feels about it. That is something that's really so deep. We've been doing death rituals as human creatures for as long as we've been around on this earth. We've found grave sites and things that are thousands of years old, because there was some mystery about this thing called death that we needed to do something with and have some way of doing that. And so we don't want the dead to just disappear in our brain and in our heart. We want to make sure that we care for them, move them to a place where they can be remembered from. Because really that's one of the great fears that we have as human beings about our mortality, is being just sort of disappearing and being forgotten. How often have we been at a funeral or memorial service and we've heard someone finish their beautiful eulogy and say to the decedent, "You will never be forgotten." I mean, we know that they couldn't, but we need to say that. And part of what that is putting them in some place where we can visit and remember and to hold close and be connected with. We get the dead where they need to go. And then the other part of that is to get the living, us, those who survive, to the place where we need to be. And what is that? That place that we need to be is the place of standing in the threshold before our whole new life, of what it's going to be like now, which we get to figure out what it's going to be like to live without this person in our life. I remember when my dad died many, many years ago, my aunt, who was several years younger than my dad, said, I have never thought or experienced a world without my brother Bob. And the wisdom that she says that she has with that is wisdom that I share with you, because that's what we're talking about. He had always been there. And these people, whether they are younger than us or not, they are so important to us. They have made a place in our heart. And our heart needs some way to acknowledge them, to acknowledge who they are and what they have been to us. And the funeral and memorial and other death rituals that we do become really, really important to us. It's never too late to have a funeral or a memorial service or some other kind of ritual ceremony to mark the death of this person and to create a flow and a process that will begin to incorporate that person into our life and space. Because that's what the process of grief is. You often hear about, somebody telling you maybe you just need to move on and things, which feels like it makes it sound like somebody has to be left behind us so that we can, cut our ties and move on. But the truth about grief is that we create connections with these people that we love who have died. We already have those bonds with them. We already have those connections, and we find ways to strengthen them. And that's part of what a funeral and a ritual does for us. Recently, Steve Hartman, who is a reporter for CBS News, had a story. He does these on Friday evenings, and this one was about a young girl who had been rescued at sea by 2 charter boat captains in 1986. It was an accident. The boat capsized. They didn't explain what happened, but the boat capsized in the water between Catalina and the shore here in California when they were coming back. And these 2 boat captains came upon this site, found the little girl, pulled her out, took her into port, got the ambulances, and took her off. Well, 35 years later, Hartman reported, they were reunited on a podcast. Somebody found out about the story and brought all 3 of them together. And what an amazing experience that was to see the 3 of them gather together in that space at that podcast, and to the emotion that they expressed and experienced all over again. Well, these 2 guys, Paul and Mark, the captains, took Desiree, the young girl, when she was rescued, Desiree, and her family, and put them on a boat and took them out to the approximate site of where the accident was. And they show these wonderful pictures of all of Desiree and her family standing on the side of the boat, and they're tossing beautiful, beautiful flowers into the water there with all kinds of flowers that were going in, a nice flower tribute that was there. They didn't say it, but I suspect that they told stories that of the people that had died there. It had been Desiree's mother and father and a sister and an aunt and an uncle. And it became the funeral ritual that they had. And Desiree says on this report, I'm kind of glad that we came back together today and can kind of heal. Her wisdom, where in this first memorial service that they were having for all those family members that died, they, very simple kind of thing, in a space, in a time with people that knew and remembered them, gathered together, did some things with their bodies, said some words, gathered all of that together into this service that was a meaningful service for them. It was a commemoration and a celebration. They commemorated the lives of those people who died, and they celebrated the life that was lived since that day. And they celebrated that through the thanksgiving that Desiree had for the men who saved her life and for the people that knew her now as an adult woman. It was an amazing story. During each of these services that I attended last week, different services, a week apart, somebody at each one of them said, I was caught off guard by the emotion that I had. It's been over a year, or it's been several weeks since they died, and I thought I was beyond my mourning. Well, you never really fully do that. A year, 15 months, people come and go. A lot of life has happened. The other one 3 months, and we just kind of sort of expect to be done with it. But as Larry said at that service, grieving is the last act of love. It is the last act, but it is an act in multiple scenes. Because grieving is something that we're never done with. When we love somebody and they create those bonds in our hearts, when they create a space in our life that we want to hold them there and give them to, we are never quite done with them. We're never finished. So even though we may have a service, there is no closure. It just moves us to a different time. We have a service. We talk about them. We spend time with them around other people. But there's not any stages that we're going to go through because grief isn't quite so clarified, and it's unfortunately pretty messy and kind of moves us around back and forth. And there is no finalization to this relationship. It is about strengthening, watering, nurturing, building those bonds even more that we have with that person. Grieving is the last act of love. The place we go to always when we are missing someone. And it may be tears. It may be through these rituals that we have and that we've put together and experienced. But grief is something that will remain with us, but it becomes something that we carry in love and in gratitude and in thankfulness, and that we carry because we want to. That person is alive with us in a new way. We don't want it to hurt. We want to move beyond the hurt with it and things, but grief is something that stays with us for a while. So to put together a memorial service, a funeral, some other kind of memorial ritual or anything bridges the gap as you discover this new life that you're living and how to carry that person with you. So I want to kind of give you a little bit of homework, if you will, as we walk from here. Think about a service. Maybe you had one, but maybe you can use this to mark another time, something special like the first anniversary of this person's death, or maybe it's their birthday, or another kind of anniversary that you would have, or special commemoration. Think about what you can do to create these rituals. Pick a day. Pick a time that is meaningful and workable for you. What do you want to do to acknowledge? What is it that you want to acknowledge? Is it the person's passing, or is there something about that person that you want to acknowledge? That will play a part into how you build your ritual and your service. What will you use to represent that person? I've seen different artifacts of a person at all different kinds of services, things like TV remotes, hats, quilts, tools. I've seen a can of beer, packs of cigarettes, all kinds of things that were meaningful to those who were living about the person who had died. And they brought them to represent that person. Then think about who will participate and what will they do. Most of the time we tell stories, we sit around and share stories, and that's really helpful for us. And we learn things about that person who died that maybe we didn't know before, because life is a much bigger book than just any one of us holds for any one person. So we share stories. Janet said last week, I heard her say that the more you talk about somebody and share stories, the more you grow close to them. And I think there's real wisdom in that. Will some of these people play some music? Will they read, something they wrote? Will they read some poetry? Will they read a sacred scripture? Whatever it may be, how will these people participate? And then where are you going to do this? that presence of you and the memory of the person whom you have lost, the people who come together, create sacred space. Space that, by definition, is special and set apart. Bring all of these pieces together. Think about them, put them in an order that'll make sense to you. Gather together and have that service. And let it be a part of your healing and a part of your grieving. I want to invite you, if you haven't followed us here on Journeys Through Grief, to find the page, click on it, follow us, keep updated with us, share your stories here. Let us build together a community of bereaved people so that we can support one another. That's what we're about. That's what we want to do. That's how we want to help and support one another, because grieving people supporting other grieving people, they've got such wisdom. I've learned so much from the bereaved. And this is a place where you can find a lot of comfort and find a lot of helpful material that will help you as you journey forward in your grief. In closing, I want to share just something again from a poet. Probably figured out I like poetry because I've mentioned it several times. But the poet is Naomi Shihab Nye. And in the midst of a poem that she has, she says, "People do not pass away. They die. Then they stay." And boy, what powerful and true words that she has. Because people find, after they have died, they find ways within our lives to be with us, and we find ways to carry them with us every day of our life going forward. Rituals help us to re-engage with those who have died and to rebuild a wounded relationship that has had to change because that person died. So I encourage you to find the rituals that will help you journey the rest of your life with the ones you love, those precious, precious people who now surround you in your memories and in their presence. Thank you all for joining in. You can always check back here and watch this again. It will be housed here at Journeys Through Grief. Look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thanks for joining us. Good evening.